Hi there, I'm recording this on short notice because there's a real chance we're about to enter the biggest event since the eclipse. Mori-sensei wrote on X that the chapters in this volume and the next deal with content as difficult and painful as Miura's eclipse. You can tell from that alone, what's coming isn't ordinary. And on a radio show, Mori-sensei added, "Right now, the power gap between Griffith and Guts is overwhelming." But Miura had devised a mechanism to close that gap. In other words, from the next chapter, that mechanism finally starts moving. Ahead of this major turn, I'll translate viewer comments from my Japanese Berserk channel into English and share them here as we think through what might happen next. First, a quick recap. After Rakshas's rampage in the Kushan Empire's new domain subsided, Daiba led Guts away, into exile with no clear destination. Deep in the forest's sanctuary, he came to a stupa, quietly standing like a tomb. He stepped inside. I had been describing him as broken, but after reading Mori-sensei's afterword in volume 43, I realized it went beyond that. For Guts, the sword is, quite literally, everything. The instant his blade at Griffith on Skellig Elfhelm cut nothing but air, the way of life he had staked since the eclipse was reduced to nothing. It wasn't merely a shattered will, he sank into a void where he couldn't even summon hatred, stripped of every color of feeling. Only when I read the afterword did I grasp that the despair ran deeper than my earlier analyses had allowed. With a vacant look, he is about to be swallowed by that darkness. Is there anything left that can move him? Let's look at the comments you sent. The most common question was, what's going to happen to Guts? I want to know what awaits Guts inside the stupa. Will he die once? Guts alone is my hope. Other ideas poured in as well. Unless he becomes something beyond human, there can be no real battle. And unless he returns to being human, the story cannot progress. The way to defeat an unbeatable, invincible enemy is to turn back time. Everyone involved in the production will surely show us a divine move. His body and the brand of sacrifice will be refreshed, powering him up into something that can even cut through dimensions with his sword. In short, we're seeing more and more wild, brute force proposals for how to clear this impossible game. And look, I get it. The situation feels so bleak, it's easy to think this is unwinnable. Is the story falling apart? But we keep our hopes because it's Miura. He wouldn't write a collapse. In the volume 43 afterword, Mori-sensei says Miura told him again and again that Guts needs despair. In other words, this despair was planned from the start. It sits squarely on the line of Miura's original design. Even so, the question remains, then what do we do from here? Here's what I want to focus on, the cover of volume 43. Look at Guts's eyes. Yes, in the story, he's at the edge of despair, but there is still light in them. Seeing that made me think a comeback is still possible. I believe this stupa arc could be the very trigger that gets Guts back on his feet. How does a man hurled to the bottom of despair take up his sword again? The story feels ready to start moving toward that moment. From here, let's turn to a topic that especially lit up the comments. Will Guts become inhuman or fight as a human? First, from the Go Apostle camp, Guts becomes an apostle, defeating the God Hand. He'll become the next Skull Knight. There were quite a few comments like these. I get the impulse faced with that overwhelming power gap, it's tempting to say he has to become an apostle. But as I argued in an earlier video I posted, even if Guts became a mere apostle, that still wouldn't let him defeat Griffith, now one of the God Hand, would it? A viewer countered, it's true, even if he becomes something beyond human, I'd struggle to answer if asked, can he really defeat Griffith that way? But my bigger question is, if Guts remains human, is there really any way for him to defeat Griffith? That comment picked up 74 likes, so it seems many of you felt the same. Others added that they still want Guts to stay human. If he's going to end up with Casca, it has to be as a human, not an apostle. Fair enough. However the story ends, if Guts becomes an apostle, that's a bad end. If Guts were to become an apostle, after death he'd be swallowed by a cauldron of dark thought and condemned to wander forever. It's often said that in an old interview Miura stated Guts will not become an apostle. And for anyone asking, but didn't the plan change? Here's my advance answer. According to Mori sensei, the broad outline of the story was already set by the Golden Age. On a radio program 2 years ago, he said Miura had the main line fixed by around age 26, roughly when Volume 5 was published. In other words, the flow up to the finale was mapped out before the eclipse. Mori also said in that same time frame that while lines and details have been updated, the core hasn't changed, which is why I still don't think Guts is headed toward becoming an apostle. To confront the God Hand, he may have no choice but to become something beyond human. Perhaps that line of questioning is a mislead pointing in that direction for now. But then the obvious follow-up is, so how does he win? The hints that bring us closer to an answer lie in the next thread, the brand and the elements that could weaken Griffith. The next most common topic was the brand. From the position of a sacrifice, you can't even touch the one you've been offered to. I thought of this when Rickard's slap actually landed, since he doesn't bear the brand. I've been hearing the same point again and again. Pushing the idea further, if cause and effect were reversed so that he was never offered as a sacrifice, Griffith would no longer be able to remain as Femto. From a more meta angle, there was also this take. If we're talking about a happy ending, I think the brand on Guts' neck will disappear. That said, the text has never once suggested that the brand can simply vanish. Read that way, erase the brand feels like a brute force fix, and Miura typically lays groundwork before effects. Still, the shared intuition is sound. If Guts does not go inhuman, Griffith must be weakened by other means. So let's look for a vector that has foreshadowing behind it. One candidate many of you raised is to read the Moonlight Boy as Griffith's remaining humanity. If that tether loosens or is reclaimed, Griffith could weaken in a way that tracks with prior setup. Even then, Guts still can't win. He has surrendered everything and lost the will to fight. Before any showdown, he needs a reason to pick up the sword again. Next, a viewer comment that could be exactly that reason. This is where the stupa matters. From Sanskrit, to rise high, it is a spiritual structure, something like a pyramid. The stupa is said to play a role in connecting this world with the other. The dead could be reached here, perhaps even a brief return of the Band of the Hawk. I replied on the spot with the scene I'd want. Judo more softly, look after the woman I loved, Casca. And in the end, Corcus saying, damn you, just hurry up and die already, right before Guts revives. Hearing those words would give Guts a reason to grip the Dragon Slayer again. It also has a relevant Miura-supervised precedent outside the manga. In the PS2 game Berserk Millennium Falcon Arc Holy Demon War chapter, an original apostle revives members of the Band of the Hawk. That doesn't prove it will happen here, but because Miura oversaw the title, the motif of the Fallen appearing again clearly sat within ideas he allowed for Berserk's world, so it serves as a meaningful reference point rather than a deviation. Some viewers also proposed that Gambino and Godot could appear as well, pushing Guts to take up the sword again. Gambino is the root of Guts' trauma. He has stayed off stage since the eclipse, yet he still gnaws at Guts. Confronting and overcoming that wound may be necessary for a true fundamental comeback. From here, I return to a thread I've explored before, the Beast of Darkness and Daiba's scheme. First, let's recall Daiba's prophecy. When the moon draws a bow to the sky in the night, when the moon is dark, from the ocean where the sun sets, a chained-up beast will come, covered with a hazy white fog. At first, I read this as pointing to Guts' party appearing at sea. The sea was wrapped in white mist, Ozin spoke, and the beast whispered, "Yield yourself." All flags that the beast might erupt. But it didn't move. Many of you felt bait and switched. That's where a question sticks. Was that really the entire fulfillment of the prophecy? It may be still uncached. If so, the stupa begins to look like the stage. On the way here, Sealot likened this place to a demon womb. Perhaps the stupa is a prototype of the womb itself. Daiba leads Guts deep into the woods, far from the palace, and the panels all but point to a demon womb-like locus. In the past, when Ganishka moved toward his second rebirth, the episode was titled Mist of Death. When he cast himself into the womb, mist, raw magical essence, overflowed and swallowed living things. The mist may be unique to Ganishka, but if it is also a property of the womb, it lines up neatly with a hazy white mist in the prophecy. And then there is the moon, a recent chapter title. A crescent moon shines on the exile's back, spells out the bow-drawn moon, and the manga even frames Isidro walking behind Guts with the crescent set directly behind him. If Griffith's rebirth under the solar eclipse is one pole, a lunar eclipse is the natural counter. The narrative keeps leaning into this motif. Crescent, dark moon, lunar eclipse dovetails with Daiba's prophecy. In other words, both the title and that panel composition line up with the prophecy's wording. Taken together, the read is this. Daiba is using the stupa, i.e. a proto-demon womb, to stage a kind of mock eclipse and unchain the chained-up beast inside Guts. He's always been impossible to read, easygoing on the surface, but whenever he seems to help Guts, it's just another experiment. Ganishka is the prime example. He isn't an ally. He's a villain through and through. If his plan works and the beast is released, the story could sink into deeper darkness. At the same time, that very release could become the hinge of a later major divergence, a turn that changes what follows. From here, my take on Guts' path forward drawn from your comments. Daiba's aim is to use the power of the fierce goddess Durga at the stupa to fully unloose the beast of darkness. The beast's chains have already been chewed through, and Guts' spirit is broken. If things continue as they are, Guts will lose himself and sink into a mere mad god. That is the same ruinous road that turned King Geyserik into the Skull Knight. And yet, at that very moment, someone moves. Shirka. She is now in the astral world checking on Casca, but from there, she rushes across the distance to support Guts. Flora's talisman will also carry weight here. Above all, there is the brand. It is a curse, yes, but as the Skull Knight suggested, it is also proof of having stepped half a pace outside the world's reason. The stupa is a place that links this world and the next, as its power resonates with that singularity that stands outside causality. Guts meets his old friends again. Corcus to berate him, Judo to entrust him, Godot and Gambino to knock sense back into him, and even the Skull Knight steps in, lending a hand so Guts does not walk the same path. Then Guts realizes it. The wavering between protecting and taking revenge, chasing both at once, was what bound him. So he returns to his origin and chooses a fight for himself. In that choice, the beast's shackles could come off, and the beast might even yield with a sneer. Fine, but at a price. Think of it as a pact of sorts. Not a certainty, but a plausible turn this theory points to. For the first time, Guts tames the beast and brings the Berserker armor under control. Not by becoming inhuman, but as a man, opening a new future unlike the Skull Knights. The teaser at the end of volume 43 reads, "What he confronts is darkness and an abnormal space we've never seen." Taken together, This supports the reading that our direction isn't far off. Guts is being steered to confront both his inner darkness and the beast of darkness itself, and the stupa as the stage aligns with the phrasing abnormal space. On that stage, Guts challenges a lunar eclipse, set against Griffith, who fell under the solar eclipse. In other words, within this stupa arc, Daiba's sinister rebirth experiment born of despair may, ironically, flip into the very trigger for Guts' return and new strength. I think the next chapter will be the turning point where Guts takes up his sword again and, while remaining human, brings the darkness to heel. This reading also connects cleanly to other foreshadowing. Guts choosing a fight for himself resonates with Zod's hesitation and Sonya's prophecy. And the solar eclipse versus lunar eclipse contrast naturally ties back to the Moonlight Boy. I feel good about this analysis as we head toward the big event, but of course I could be completely wrong. Before the eclipse, who could have predicted that sequence? Even if someone had, they would have second-guessed it as a mistake. Sheer madness. Who can truly foresee a story Miura forged with torment on par with the eclipse? That said, following an unpredictable story in real time and theorizing together. That's the joy of being a core Berserk fan. As an aside, there's an Ichiban Kuji Berserk lottery coming in September. Among the prizes are 4 Beherites. The Egg of the King and a Weeping Beherit make sense, but there's also a Blue Beherit for some reason. Blue brings to mind the Beherit Balzac carried in the game. Would they really pull from that for merchandise? To be fair, the Blue Beherit has been merchandised before, so it isn't the first time, but the timing makes me curious. One lingering regret, I didn't touch on the Beherit Guts used to carry. We haven't seen its face in a long while, and as a condemned man stripped of everything, Guts probably doesn't have it now. Then again, that was true for Griffith as well. The situations are uncomfortably similar. In any case, the answer key is close. See you in the next video for the latest chapter breakdown. Thanks for watching.